Thanks again for joining everyone today. We are Lubrizol and Johnson Controls, and we're very excited to answer your questions about BlazeMaster Cpvc and residential and commercial fire protection systems. I'll start by having everyone introduce themselves and giving you a brief introduction. So my name is Lainey Liotta, and I am the market manager of fire protection for Lubrizol. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years now, and prior to that, I worked for a different chemical manufacturer in the HVAC or refrigerant space. Prior to that, I was with Tyco Johnson Controls for about 5 years as the global product manager for residential fire sprinklers and Cpvc. Michelle, I'll let you introduce yourself next.
Hi, I'm Michelle Knight. I've been in the research and development department of the Cpvc group for 31 years, and my specialty is in materials testing and failure analysis and chemical compatibility.
And I know Sean Pearce was having some technical difficulties. Sean, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that. I think the COVID world and working from home. I'm Sean Pearce. I'm the Fire Protection Business Development Manager here at Lubrizol. I've been either in a consulting or permanent capacity with Lubrizol for about 2 years now.
Mark?
Hello, I'm Mark Fessenden. I'm Director of Industry Relations for Johnson Controls. I've been with Johnson Controls, Tyco Central for 26 years. Most of that time has been in research and development and technical services. And I'm a member of the NFPA 13 residential committee representing 13D and 13R.
Hi, I'm Don Ricca. I'm the product director for fire sprinklers and Cpvc. I've been with Johnson Controls and Tyco before that for about 10 years.
All right, thanks everyone from Lubrizol and JCI for joining us today, and thank you to all of you in the crowd for joining us. We're excited to answer some of the questions. As you know, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago at which we had a lot of questions come in from you guys, and so we thought that this would be a good opportunity to have sort of a live Q&A session to answer some of the questions we weren't able to get to during our last webinar, in addition to any other questions you might have. Again, if you just joined, if you do have any questions, please enter them through the Q&A box, and we will try to get to them as we go through our list. So this is intended to be sort of just a casual chat and conversation where we don't necessarily have any sort of canned answers or any specific schedule. So I'm just going to sort of ask questions at the order that they came in, and whoever from Lubrizol or JCI is best suited to answer, please feel free to do so. So the first question that came in is, where can I buy BlazeMaster? I think someone from JCI can answer that.
Yeah, I can take that one, Lainey. So Tyco BlazeMaster is sold nationwide in the US and Canada and other parts of the world. And you can buy them through any licensed Tyco distributor. If you go to tyco-fire.com, you can see the list of our distribution locations. And I would also encourage you to reach out to one of our sales representatives in your area to find out more specifics about your locale.
Great, thank you. Next question. Most of the issues I have seen are due to improper installation. Does Tyco or Lubrizol have an installer certification program? Sean, I'll let you answer that.
Sorry, Lainey. Lainey, can you say that again? I was reading questions. I apologize.
Most of the issues I have seen are due to improper installation. Does Tyco or Lubrizol have an installer certification program?
So yes, we have a number of ways you can take the training. It's suggested you get your training renewed every 2 years as listings evolve, and we're constantly trying to upgrade the product to make it easier for installers and the ability to use it more broadly in construction. On our website, you can take a self-directed course. Since March with COVID, we've also begun training using a video broadcast, a platform. We're using Zoom as our platform. And then as we return to the field, there'll be live training offerings again back in the field, and you can reach out to any one of our territory managers for information on that, or again through our website.
Great, thanks, Sean. So we have a lot of questions about applications, specific applications and the general applications regarding BlazeMaster. Is BlazeMaster listed for exposed installations, and can it be left exposed in non-residential areas? Are there any special considerations to make when leaving Cpvc exposed?
So I'll take this one if you don't mind, Lainey. If you reference the manufacturer's installation instructions, you'll find detailed examples and guidelines on how to install piping both concealed and exposed. The exposed listings differ depending upon sprinkler type. So there will be slightly different rules depending upon whether you're dealing with standard coverage, extended coverage, residential, whether you're dealing with pendants, uprights, or sidewalls. But yeah, absolutely, Cpvc has been listed for use exposed for, man, it's got to be close to 25 years. So it's definitely an option. You do have to be aware of some of the limitations, like I said, when you're dealing with some of the special use sprinkler types. But yeah, in accordance with those installation instructions, you can absolutely utilize it in exposed conditions.
And Mark, if exposed for light hazard occupancies, is there a maximum sprinkler spacing requirement?
Depends on the sprinkler type, right? So we have options for both standard and extended coverage sprinklers, as well as residential. So yeah, you know, as long as you're following the guidelines based on the sprinkler type you select, you're in good shape.
Perfect. A couple of questions about BlazeMaster and ordinary hazard occupancies. Is BlazeMaster listed for ordinary hazard occupancies? I can answer that one quickly. That is no, we're only listed for light hazard occupancies. However, there are some instances where you can use BlazeMaster in a primarily residential system or light hazard system with a little bit of ordinary hazard occupancies within it. Mark, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, from a NFPA committee perspective, the NFPA technical committees have essentially established a risk assessment based on experience with Cpvc, and what the standards do is they allow certain options outside the listing to address limited ordinary hazard areas. And those are typically ordinary hazard areas in what would otherwise be a light hazard occupancy. So if you think about let's say a floor for a hotel type occupancy, there may be a laundry area on a particular floor, which is small in scope. And the allowances are really designed to kind of cover that incidental portion of what is otherwise a light hazard occupancy. And depending upon whether you're dealing with a 13 system or a 13R system, those guidelines or those rules are slightly different. So I would definitely take a look at the standard itself, which is going to give you the best guidelines on how to properly install the sprinkler piping within that occupancy type. You're going to have a little bit more flexibility in 13R than you do in 13.
Thanks, Mark. All right, another question that we have is, are Tyco's attic heads listed for use with all brands of Cpvc or just BlazeMaster?
Yeah, that's actually a great question as well. And ultimately, whenever you look at, mixing various manufacturers of product, whether it's the sprinklers that are providing protection for the piping within the space, or even if it's mixing different types of or different manufacturers of piping products, even amongst the licensees. What you'll find is that listings are very specific based on those particular products. Right? So, as an example, when we look at the Tyco attic sprinklers, we specifically investigated those for use with BlazeMaster product, and so that would be BlazeMaster product from any of the BlazeMaster licensees. Now, other manufacturers of CPVC piping, may have gone out and got their own listing, and if they have gone out and got their own listing, then it will be part of their installation instructions. And one of the things that's important to identify is that those manufacturers' installation instructions, whether it's from JCI, Tyco, whether it's from Viking, whether it's from someone else, those installation instructions are part of our UL listing. They're included in what we refer to as our follow-up services. So we have to submit those installation instructions. They're reviewed by the listing agencies, and they're part of our system. So if you're following the materials, the guidelines that are within those installation instructions, then you're good to go. So if you're using, if you're utilizing the JCI Tyco attic sprinklers with any BlazeMaster product in accordance with our attic sprinkler tech data sheet, you're good to go. If you're using another type of CPVC, you'd have to refer to their installation instructions and verify, validate appropriate use.
Thanks, Mark. And we actually had a couple of questions come in regarding back to the light hazard versus ordinary hazard. Can you install in some of those closet spaces that you were talking about, can you, in the ordinary hazard spaces that you can use BlazeMaster, can you leave BlazeMaster exposed in those areas?
Yeah, so in general, the rule's always been 400 square feet. So if the ordinary hazard room and the otherwise light hazard occupancy is 400 square feet or less, there's kind of no restriction in terms of whether the piping is concealed or exposed, as long as it's installed in accordance with the manufacturer's installation instructions in terms of piping position, spacing, all of those other elements. If you want to go over 400 square feet, which you can do in, let's say, 13R occupancy, then the piping has to be concealed. But the standard itself will specify what those rules and requirements are for that particular configuration. So definitely take a look at those guidelines within the standard, and that'll be your best source of information.
Yeah, Lainey, it's Sean. Mark's right on the money. The other thing to recognize is that that's not a cumulative 400 square feet. That's per application. So if you had the exact same mechanical closet on every floor of a building, each would be measured independently of the other. It's not a cumulative number.
Great. A couple questions in different phrases came in regarding, can you mix Spears CPVC with BlazeMaster CPVC? For example, can you use BlazeMaster pipe with Spears fittings or vice versa?
So I think, sorry, I jumped in. So Michelle, I'm sure, can help us with the chemical composition of the two products, and they are both CPVC, and you can solvent weld them together. The problem begins, based on Mark's previous answers as well. When you're mixing materials have different application listings, and so if you're installing BlazeMaster pipe exposed in a basement with composite wood joists, and you're using the BlazeMaster head spacing, if you apply, and that's the way the system was designed, if you apply Spears components of some kind into that system, that listing, as a former AHJ, I would default down to the lower listing, the Spears listing, and so the installation may not meet the local building code requirements, which designate the standard and listing be used accordingly. So while you can solvent weld them together, there's issues around the listings and mixing the listings that you have to be very aware of and very careful with, as well as some of the concerns you're going to have about warranty and different things like that that'll come into question as well. But I think the biggest issue, and Mark, Michelle, please jump in. I think the biggest issue is the listing applications for the products and making sure you're meeting the intent of your local building code by having the correct listing, the correct head spacing, the correct application based on the listing for the material.
Yeah, I think the biggest. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is Don. I was going to jump in real quick. Yeah, I think you're spot on, Sean. The other thing to consider, warranty is an issue because, we at Tyco, JCI only warrant the products that we produce. And when we get our listings, we actually list the assemblies. So when we test and list our CPVC, it's not, it's solvent welded with other pieces of Tyco BlazeMaster. So technically, if you're using a mixed system, you're not actually following the listing. That's kind of the point you were making. And the second thing is we can't control Spears or competitors' manufacturing tolerances. So that's where you can run into problems. Like the size of the fitting, the nominal width could be the same, but the differences could show itself in the field, and that's where problems can arise. So would the system work? Yes, but I think there are some problems when you start mixing two different manufacturers. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was going to say the same thing as Don. I think it's principally a warranty issue, and it comes down to if there is a problem, where it becomes a finger pointing game. It's a pipe issue, or it's a fitting issue, or it's the choice of solvent cement that you've utilized. Those would be the issues that kind of come into play. Not all manufacturers are using the same solvent cements, and those solvent cements are specifically listed for that piping system. We choose to go with a couple of different vendors and have historically used a couple of different vendors for our sourcing, and not everyone has done that. So from a warranty perspective, if you want to assure that you have that 10-year warranty that that you get from Johnson Controls Tyco, then you're going to want to make sure that all of the assemblies are Tyco Cpvc.
Yeah, I think another thing is, and Michelle can jump in, is that the chemical compound used in Spears is not made by Lubrizol. It's a completely different chemical compound, and so that's one of the reasons why we can achieve certain listings that, including, again, I'll go back to our head spacing or our ASTM, our higher ASTM rating that allows us to be used for passive purge systems, and Spears products cannot. So you're mixing two different chemical compounds that affects the listing process as well. So Lainey, I hope that covers it.
I think it does. To sort of sum everything up is, technically you can, per Spears listings, mix Lubrizol, BlazeMaster, CPVC with Spears Flame Guard, but it does present a lot of areas, a lot of potential problems, and a lot of things could go wrong and create some complexities because of everything that we just mentioned. Which kind of brings us into another question, and I think is another reason why we don't recommend mixing systems or brands in a single system, is compatibility. One question is it safe to assume what is compatible with BlazeMaster CPVC is compatible with Spears CPVC and vice versa? The answer is absolutely no. It is not safe to assume that. We have as Sean mentioned, BlazeMaster CPVC is a Lubrizol product. The resin and compounds are manufactured by Lubrizol. We have absolutely nothing to do with Spears's Flame Guard product. And Michelle, I'll let you sort of elaborate upon the differences, the potential differences between BlazeMaster and CPVC from a compatibility standpoint.
Right. So I'll just start by saying, if you compare one compatibility list versus another, you'll see that they are not remotely the same, and that's not just because of the fact that they're done by two different companies. As Lainey said, Spears CPVC, they make their own CPVC compound with resin that they buy. And so both of those things can vary. The resin itself can have a different molecular weight, can have a different chlorine content, and those will affect compatibility quite strongly. And then the CPVC that the pipe and fittings are made out of contains a lot of different additives. Obviously, there's pigment in there to make it orange, and then there are other stabilizers, impact modifiers, and various sorts of additives that go in to give it the properties we need specifically for the BlazeMaster fire sprinkler application. And those can also affect the compatibility to a smaller degree. And so we don't recommend that you use our list for use with Spears, and we certainly don't recommend that you use Spears' list of compatible chemicals for use with BlazeMaster, because the materials do vary, and as Sean alluded to, the strength of the materials varies. So you'll notice, as Sean mentioned, our sprinkler head spacing may vary, or the squirt spacing may vary. Based on the strength of the material. Lubrizol's BlazeMaster material has a strength quite a bit higher than the minimum required in the standard. And when you're talking about compatibility issues, the compatibility is obviously basically a loss in strength. So if you're starting from a higher baseline with the same chemical, you're going to have more resistance to it. So I think that answers the question.
I think it does as well. So kind of switching topics here, because I think I was able to get to most of them regarding, mixing product and things like that. Is UV exposure an issue for CPVC?
Michelle, I don't know if you want me to take that or if you want to take it.
I can take it. Well, UV exposure can cause a little bleaching of the orange color especially if it's a long exposure, leaving it outdoors in the sun for a long time. So you'll lose some color. You might lose some impact strength as well. So you might find it a little harder to cut, or it might be a little more sensitive to impact damage if it's been laying out in the sun for a long time. But what it does not lose is its pressure bearing capability. So you might be familiar with some other plastics that if they're left out in the sun, they lose some of their lifetime, basically. It uses up antioxidants in the compound that it's going to rely on for its lifetime. That's not the case with CPVC. You're not using up any antioxidants in the compound. You're not reducing the lifetime any. You are just going to make it maybe a little bit more difficult to handle. It might lose a little bit of impact strength, but as long as you can get it installed without cracking it, it's going to have the same lifetime and the same pressure bearing capability, even if it's been exposed to UV.
So if you don't mind, Michelle, I'm going to add a couple of things to that as well. If you are doing any type of cut-in when you've seen that the piping may be faded based on exposure. You don't use a ratchet cutter for that. Use a wheel cutter. You want to have a nice clean cut that's not going to put additional stressing on the piping. You may also want to consider painting the piping so as to kind of have an additional layer of protection on that piping. You do not want to use an oil-based paint. You want to use a water-based paint, and you want to make sure you get approval from the authority having jurisdiction first, because you're going to be covering up the markings on the piping. So you need to be transparent in terms of that process, but that may be something that you want to consider. And there are definitely situations where we've had CPVC outdoors exposed for years and years. Wharves are a great example where that occurs. So with the proper installation processes and things like painting the piping, you could have a lot of success in that scenario.
So, Mark, you brought up wharves, and there was a question that came in saying if CPVC is only approved for use in light hazard occupancies, can you explain why I've seen it used in piers and marinas that are typically considered ordinary hazard occupancies?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of the light hazard use, what we're typically referred to as light hazard use in terms of overhead piping supplying a sprinkler system. We have other options within the CPVC arena in terms of where it can be used and applied. One example would be underground or use as a private water supply. So, or for that matter, even certain wet stand pipes might be CPVC as well. So it's not necessarily just limited to the traditional light hazard occupancy. There are other uses and applications for CPVC, which are outlined within the installation manual. In that particular case, I would almost look at wharf usage as a water supply versus occupancy protection. So I think that's where you see that differentiation.
Yeah, and actually we have an entire blog post about this on BlazeMaster.com in areas, I think Mark hit the nail right on the head. And really what it comes down to is just working with the local AHJ to get the material approved for use in that application as well. And if that's something that you are interested in, we at Lubrisol as well as Blaze as well as JCI are more than happy to support those efforts. Next question, is BlazeMaster CPVC pipe approved to be used with seismic bracing or seismic strains?
So I can take that. One of my other hats is I'm also a member of the NFP 200 technical committee, which is responsible. It's a new standard that's specifically addressing how we deal with piping support for active fire protection systems. So we look at various ways of providing protection for all types of piping, including CPVC as part of that. And there are specialty hangers that can be utilized to support CPVC within seismic areas. You're not necessarily required to utilize those specific hangers. There's a variety of options that are available. One of the things I would say is that you want to definitely understand how the pipe is going to move and understand where you're going to have fixed points and where you're going to have free movement in terms of guides through differing support. And as you kind of look at how you brace your piping system, you just want to have an awareness of where your braces are relative to your fittings, and you don't want to put undue stress at a joint or a piping connection when you're installing those support systems. But absolutely, you can utilize CPVC piping in earthquake zones. We've done that for, since the introduction of the piping system. There are some specialty hangers that you can utilize that are designed specifically for CPVC use, but you're not necessarily required to utilize those specific hangers to accomplish compliance with the installation standards.
Yeah, Lainey, Mark's got it right on the money. The other thing I would suggest to people is that they consider expansion and contraction when placing their hangers, and often an offset or a change of direction. Just as Mark said, make sure you position your hangers in such a way that you allow for expansion and contraction naturally in the design of the system. And when you're bracing for seismic requirements, that you take expansion and contraction into consideration there as well.
Great. A lot of questions coming in regarding the use of steel and CPVC in the same system. One is, will joining steel pipe with CPVC pipe affect performance of the CPVC pipe in the fire sprinkler system? And is there any issue of converting from CPVC to steel and back to CPVC?
Honestly, that's why we have thread adapters, and that's why we have grooved adapters, right? You're going to make those connections, right? One of the things that I would say is all of your installation instructions are going to talk about how to make that connection. So make sure that you're following those rules and requirements. Typically, we're going to want to see the steel piping flush to make sure that there aren't any contaminants, any oils, any foreign materials that could potentially have a negative impact on the CPVC piping system. But if you exercise a little care and caution in that process, then we've had a long history of seeing systems combined. One of the things I will mention is if you are connecting via one of our grooved connections, make sure you're using a flexible coupling. We don't want to use a rigid coupling on that point of connection. So I've seen that a couple of times, but as long as you're following the installation instructions, you're good to go.
So sorry, Lee, just on the same topic, if you're when you're doing internals on the metallic portions of the piping, you may want to have a look even though CPVC is not required to have an internal inspection done, you may want to have a look, at the CPVC pipe closest to that joint between the metallics to make sure that no Mick or anything has moved or migrated with water pressure into any of the CPVC areas.
And then what about, can you use Mick treated steel pipe and CPVC pipe in the same system?
Right, so I'll take that one. In general, you can. FM has a factory mutual, has a compatibility listing program for CPVC and steel pipe. And so, we would recommend that you check the factory mutual listings to make sure the steel pipe is listed as compatible with the CPVC.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I'll just add in terms of corrosion, you turn back the clock, 15 years ago, and we use the term Mick to describe just about every type of corrosion out there, right? And today we know that only a small percentage of pipeline corrosion is really Mick, right? And the corrosion challenges that we see have very much been mitigated by changes to the NFPA standards in terms of things like air venting on wet systems, or potentially even wet systems that include nitrogen, and kind of as you look at that gas-water interface that sometimes occurs within a piping system, that that's a natural point of corrosion. So I think in some ways, turning back the clock, we may have kind of overreacted to Mick based on what we knew at the time, and now we're beginning to make corrections that truly identify what's going on with within these piping systems. That's kind of an ongoing process within the code and standard development activities. But certainly, if you're looking at a system, or looking at water supplies where corrosion is likely, Cpvc becomes a great alternative or a great option to try and address those types of water supplies.
So when dealing with transitioning from steel to Cpvc or vice versa, does Tyco have transition fittings available? And when using a groove transition adapter, is there a requirement on the type of coupling that's used, whether it's flex or rigid, etc.?
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Use the rigid coupling. We have both threaded connections as well as groove connections. So either of those would be appropriate.
Great. Let's see. So there were a couple questions that came in about is BlazeMaster listed by UL or FM to be installed embedded in concrete? Sean, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We've seen, so the one caveat is that as of right now, it is only listed for use in cast in place. So you cannot use it embedded in concrete in a post-tension slab. We are seeing this listing's been in place in Europe and Asia for a number of years, and it came over in the last 18 months or so into North America and got the UL listing, and we're seeing some use and application in Canada right now, and a lot of interest in the US, but there are very specific requirements and how to do it. It's in JCI's BlazeMaster installation guide, and we have a number of documents put together that are available on our website on how to do it as well. You can, if there's an interest in doing this, and there are some very key benefits. Your labor force is really driven up front, and you're no longer working on ladders, and so there's definitely some benefits there. But we're available to help with anybody that has any interest in this application and go through some best practices and some of the things we've seen done using this listing.
Great. Another question, can a sprinkler branch line pass over a compartment without requiring a sprinkler head to be installed in that compartment in a concealed installation?
Right, so Cpvc piping can be installed in any non-combustible or combustible concealed space, not requiring sprinkler protection. Right, so as long as you're following within that category, if passing Cpvc piping through that space is not an issue. Right, so in the case of a commercial occupancy, that could very well be any internal combustible concealed space. In the case of 13D or 13R, an attic space, which is kind of protected or separated unused attic space from the rest of the residential occupancy, that's considered often a combustible concealed space not requiring sprinkler protection. That's what allows the piping to be utilized in that space to supply the floor below.
Great. And then, Mark, can you talk a little bit about Cpvc and BlazeMaster's listings for dry systems?
Sure. This is something that was kind of near and dear to my heart. I was one of the development engineers for this particular application. So Cpvc piping can absolutely be used for both residential as well as light hazard applications. When we're dealing with a residential application, we need to have a 15-second water delivery time. When we need to light hazard, that would be a 60-second water delivery time. You don't have to change the C factor; it remains 150. So that kind of gives us a nice advantage with CPVC piping. And in general, the one thing I would kind of point out. Well, there's a couple things I'll point out. One, we need to make sure that we maintain a supervisory air pressure within the piping, 15 psi or less. We don't want to pressurize higher than 15 psi. We want to make sure that the piping is appropriately pitched. The installation standards will tell us what type of pitch to utilize, and then if depending upon whether we choose nitrogen or whether we're choosing air in terms of our gas pressure. If we are choosing an air compressor, we need to make sure that it doesn't have oils that would be released in the piping system and potentially create a problem downstream. But as long as you follow those rules and requirements that are outlined within our installation instructions and technical manual, CPVC can absolutely be used on a dry system for both light hazard as well as residential.
Okay, one question about solvent cement. What's the difference between TSP 5000 and 6000? Or I think it actually should be 500 and 600.
Yeah, different manufacturers use a couple of different designations. So I think Nipco in the past has used the 1000 designation, where Tyco has kind of utilized the 100 designation. So I'm not sure if Don wants to jump in and talk about the differences between the 500 and the 600, but
yeah. So really, the only difference between the 500 and the 600 is the supplier of the solvent cement. So we use two different suppliers, but the formulations are designed specifically for Tyco BlazeMaster, and both have been tested and approved for use with those joints. So really it's just the difference in the manufacturer, but the quality is the same.
Great. Another question, why is CPVC restricted to maximum 3-inch in size?
It's not, actually. Historically, BlazeMaster has been available outside the U.S. in pipe sizes up to 4-inch. We haven't done that traditionally here in the U.S. Mainly the restrictions or the reasons that or limiting factors is just in the challenges associated with joining larger diameter piping. When you get into pipe sizes, even 3-inch and larger, it can be difficult to get full rotation or engagement in a fitting and rotation to assure that we get nice distribution of solvent cement on our joints. So just trying to get the fittings to connect in a 4-inch pipe size is particularly challenging. The other thing I would say is that because our piping is a standard dimensional ratio, as you kind of look at the internal diameter of CPVC piping, in the larger pipe sizes, it begins to lose hydraulic advantage. You do have a difference in C factor, obviously, but you often have a reduced inside diameter as compared to an equivalent IPS for steel piping, right? So hydraulically, you may find that there's a point where you don't have that same advantage with CPVC as you would on the smaller pipe sizes. So there's no physical reason for kind of stopping at the 3-inch pipe size. We could certainly go larger if we wanted, but it's really kind of the economics of installation.
Great. One question, we have a really good question. Are there any recommended methods to ensure only compatible building materials are in contact with the CPVC And how do you educate the GC and their subs?
Don, you want to go?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, you know,
Yeah.
we have job site placards that you can print, that you can download on our website, tyco-fire.com, and kind of use those in different applications. But I think that's effective. I think that the good news is, over, at least since I've been part of this industry, is the education piece has gone. I guess the Cpvc IQ has gone way up. And that's reflected in, you know, the decreased number of issues that we've ever seen. So I think job site placards, talking to the trades, looking at the schedules, that's really the best way that I've heard in educating the constituents. Sean?
Yeah, thanks, Don. I completely agree. And I think that when you're bidding a job, to include the JCI information on compatibility in your bid, and then again, when you step onto a job site, make sure their site super gets a placard, and then even on the job site, if you post them in areas of high traffic, I mean, if you post them just anywhere, nobody will read them. That's the nature of a job site. But if you're in a high-rise building and there's a buck horse elevator where people will be standing and waiting, that's a good spot. Or if you've got a controlled entrance point, that's another good spot. But I think using the job site notifications tells the construction management team that you know about compatibility and that you're on top of it, and that you're trying to educate other trades on the job site as well. So I think if you use those job site placards well, and the compatibility documentation that JCI has in place, I think you can really limit your exposure.
Yep, I agree. And then in the chat, I have posted a link where you can access that job site notice, the turnover letter, directly from our website. It shoots you right over to Tyco's website as well. And additionally, I think, it's always smart to reference fbcsystemcompatible.com, which is available as an app, as well as online, and always look for, compatible products. And we also have a list of incompatible products. And for anything that isn't specifically listed on either of those lists, we also have a section called Other Chemical Compatibility Topics, where you can go on and choose the product category, and we give some information about chemicals and ingredients within those products that we've found to be compatible or incompatible in the past. So we have a pretty robust program that Lubrizol is very, very proud of. So I think, as Don said, some of those concerns have decreased over the years, just because we have become so good at evaluating and notifying and educating all construction stakeholders. There are a couple questions going back to storing Cpvc and having it, and potentially it being outside. How long can BlazeMaster be stored before use, both indoors and covered? And then, is there a specific time period at which you would say to no longer use it if it has been stored uncovered outside? So it's two separate questions. We'll cover the first one first. How long can BlazeMaster pipe be stored?
Well, our recommendation will always be to keep it in the original packaging, right? And if it's in the original packaging and it's outdoors, it can be outside for a prolonged period of time, right? If it's not in the original packaging, that's when you'll be able to begin to see some fading or some discoloration of the piping. It can certainly still be used, but as Michelle and I both alluded earlier, you just have to exercise a little bit of care during that installation, right? So you wouldn't want to use ratchet cutters on the piping, because it might be a little bit more brittle than it would otherwise be. So in terms of exterior storage, try and keep it in the original packaging if you can. And there isn't really a timetable that we establish as to what would be excessive in that regard. So.
Great. Let's see. So is it possible to use CPVC pipes with pumps rated at 16 bars?
Well, now I'm just going to have to Google what 16 bar is.
I know, I was thinking the same thing.
That's, yeah, I know that's definitely higher than the 175 psi. So what
230, Mark?
Yeah, so what you would do in this particular case is if you had working pressures higher than 175, you would have to do a pressure reducing valve to reduce the pressures to 175 for that normal system pressure. So we kind of take a look at that. Now, certainly if you're seeing situations where you regularly have pressures higher than 175, maybe even as high as 250, we'd love to kind of explore that type of situation with you and what your pressure needs are. So, we're always looking at trying to solve industry problems, and if you can kind of identify that as a reoccurring problematic situation, then who's to say that something couldn't be developed in the future to address that. But the maximum working pressure is 175, and you'd need to maintain that in that particular case.
Hey, Lainey, it's Sean. So Mark's got it right again, as always. Thanks, Mark. But I think some of the things we're seeing right now is the use of high pressure express risers in tall buildings. And I don't know if that's where this question came from, but again, the use of that PRV, that pressure reducing valve off of an express riser is really important. Because as Mark said, 175 is our upper limit pressure right now. But as buildings are getting higher, I think we're seeing more and more of that higher pressure. And so it's something definitely that we're looking to address.
And what is the highest pressure that you can air test at?
That would be 15 psi.
15, yeah.
We spell that out in the listing limitations. Yeah. So we normally recommend hydrostatically testing the system, and actually, the hydrostatic test would be the one time you could potentially exceed the 175. We do allow hydrostatic testing up to 50 psi higher than system working pressure. So potentially, for that 2-hour duration, you could hydrostatically test the system at 225 psi in accordance with our installation instructions. But in terms of air testing, you're going to be limited to the 15 psi in accordance with our technical manual.
Great. We have a couple questions in regards to drying time. So I think that the best way to ask it is, how do you know what the dry time should be depending on, the pressure and the size and the location and environment in which you're installing?
Yeah, Lainey, I would say that, again, that's a situation where you follow the charts in the installation instructions. We have some very specific guidelines on how to make it or do a repair on systems, but ultimately cure times are specifically addressed within that technical manual, and it will vary based on your working pressure and ambient temperature. One of the things I would always encourage people to do whenever they are doing repair is I would always recommend that you're using a new can of one-step solvent. So I wouldn't suggest you use a can that's been kind of sitting in the truck for a couple of years if you're going to make that repair joint use some new fresh material.
Great. One question about the rapid seal head adapters. How likely is cross-threading with the rapid seal head adapters?
I can take that one, Lainey. Yeah, so that when we developed the rapid seal, that upfront concern was first and foremost on the minds of the engineers that developed it. So, that we specifically developed that product to avoid cross-threading. And while it's possible, that product has been out in the field now for over 2 years, and I have yet to get a field complaint on cross-threading. So I hope that speaks for itself. It's possible to cross-thread it, so I'm not going to say that, but you really have to kind of put it in at an angle or force it to make that happen. It definitely does not happen easy. So we've been really happy with the performance of the Rapid Seal when it comes to the cross-threading potential issue.
Lainey, Don's got it right. But just to go back to a previous question where we talked about mixing systems, one of the issues that was in the past, and we saw a lot of people mixing Spears and BlazeMaster, was because of their gasketed head adapter. And now with JCI's Rapid Seal head adapter, they've pretty much solved that. They've got an excellent product. I think, Don, you're right. For somebody to thread that head adapter, they have to decide they're going to do that and forcibly make it happen. It's not something you can do naturally. But the other thing I think important on that head adapter is its NSF rating, which is a fairly unique addition to that head adapter line.
And so we have 1 minute left, and this question came in at the beginning, but I've been kind of saving it for the end from Bob. And it's, where do you see the future of Cpvc going in terms of expansion for uses in sprinkler systems? Do you see it expanding beyond light hazard and residential occupancy classifications? So I will answer that. I mean, as we've discussed, Cpvc, BlazeMaster Cpvc is particularly used widely used in residential occupancies right now, but there are a lot of occupancies that are still considered light hazard that BlazeMaster is not widely used, such as office buildings, churches, things like that, where we'd really like to see the use of Cpvc grow in those areas in and of itself, which is what we're working on at Lubrisol to work with customers to see how we can change our product to make it more beneficial in those applications, and then in terms of getting it approved for occupancies beyond light hazard. That would be absolutely wonderful, but I don't know that we're anywhere close to that even being a possibility right now. But ideally, it would be awesome to have something Cpvc rated for more than just light hazard occupancies. It is 3 o'clock Eastern now, so unfortunately, we're going to have to answer all of the other questions that we weren't able to get to either via email. We are happy to stay on and answer some more questions if your guys' time allowed. But for those questions that we don't get to, we can get to via email. So we'll stay on for maybe about 10 more minutes. And if anyone on the panel has to go, please do so. And obviously, any attendees that have to go, feel free, but we'll take about 10 more minutes to answer questions. I know Mark Fessenden is able to stay. I'm able to stay, and we can try and get to the rest of these. There's a couple questions came in about using Cpvc to retrofit high-rise apartments, specifically in the UK. Can Cpvc be used for the riser? And that's approximately 50 meters high, provided that they observe the technical requirements for thermal expansions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no issue with that installation. Even let's say wet standpipes, we could utilize Cpvc in that particular configuration within the scope of its listing. So no issues or no concerns. I think one of the things that we do have to keep in mind is that pressure capability, right? So we would need to recognize that 175 PSI limitation. So that's going to establish essentially how many floors you can feed from your pump with the CPVC piping. But that would really be the only limitation, is the pressure bearing capability.
Great. We've gotten a lot of questions regarding.
I think Sean had an addition to that.
Yeah, no, you know what, Mark, I didn't, but I wanted to jump in. I just got an email from somebody I know who asked a question about the Spears has a grip lock coupling, a service coupling that it doesn't have a UL approval, and they just sent me an email asking if we have any plans to create a ULC approved service coupling.
I was actually just going to say that, Sean,
Sorry.
actually just going to address that. We've gotten a lot of questions about that. So currently, BlazeMaster, neither Tyco nor Viking BlazeMaster has any repair couplings like that of Spears grip lock. As we said many times before, Spears is not BlazeMaster or associated with BlazeMaster Lubrizol in any way. So that's, unique to them. We currently don't have anything that we offer. One thing that is important to note, though, is that with the repair couplings that Spears does have, they are not UL listed. And so that's always important to realize and understand, especially if you're dealing with an AHJ. Mark, I don't know if you were going to say anything additional.
No, I was just going to kind of tie that into some of the things in terms of, where we could potentially go in the future. Historically, we actually have listings for Tyco, JCI, BlazeMaster, CPVC piping with groove couplings. We've done testing where we've cut groove. You certainly can't roll groove CPVC piping, and we have listed those types of joining methods. Unfortunately, the gap was really in how you're able to cut that groove on the CPVC, and we haven't to this point been able to find a really efficient and effective way to do that where we don't add additional stress on the piping. So, future state, I'd love to see us, if the technology kind of develops where we're able to groove that piping in place. I'd love to see us kind of complete that project with the groove couplings. So, but that's kind of future state in terms of where we might go.
Great. Another question is, please address exposed piping in locations other than smooth sloped ceilings, such as crawl spaces or unfinished basements where the riser is exposed and or attached to a hydrant. These areas usually require an intermediate temperature head due to lack of climate control. The installation guide says that the piping should be protected via 155-degree heads.
That's not the case. We actually have options for intermediate temperature sprinklers. One of the things to keep in mind is that the CPVC piping has a maximum ambient temperature of 150, the same way that a 175 or 200 or 212 degree sprinkler has a maximum temperature rating of 150. So it's entirely appropriate when we spell that out within our listing instructions to install intermediate temperature sprinklers on CPVC. Now, in the case of the 13D and 13R occupancies, we do have special requirements for exposed risers, and we have some temperature restrictions related to that specific installation, but it isn't always the case where you have to use an ordinary temperature sprinkler. So I would say that if you find that particular scenario is problematic, that's a great opportunity to kind of let Lainey or Sean know, where we might take exposed riser listings to that next level. So we can kind of keep that in mind as well. So. Go ahead.
So, sorry, Mark. some of the other things to consider when you talk about risers is specifically in a 13D application. If you're thinking about your risers in a furnace room or something to that effect, and you're worried about that heat source, there are things that you can look at. Remember, the riser has to be an inch. I think it's 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches off the wall. So there's conditions for that riser, but as well, sometimes an AHJ will allow a small space application if you protect that riser with a sprinkler head. And there's numerous ways to try and address that. I don't think it's as big a problem. You just have to sometimes be a little creative. Mark, I don't know if you agree or.
No, I would definitely agree. We've also done situations where we've measured temperature in the space and verified that it didn't exceed 100 degrees. And then we've installed the ordinary temperature sprinklers in that particular case. So we can certainly take a look at the different options. I think the option that you're kind of referring to in terms of the pendants is the residential pendants. So there may be a situation where we look at a non-residential pendant and we don't have that same 155 degree restriction. So sprinkler type might be an option to consider as well.
Can Cpvc pipe be used in water systems?
Yes, absolutely. It is a completely appropriate type of piping for those systems. What I would say is that in terms of the type of water mist system, you need to have a system that's based on low pressure, right? And you need to maintain that pressure tolerance with the Cpvc. So as long as we're dealing with systems less than 175 psi, water mist systems are perfectly acceptable for wet Cpvc systems. Water mist systems aren't typically dry, but certainly from a wet perspective, yeah, no issue, no problem.
Does JCI make an adjustable drop nipple in Cpvc?
We do not. We do not. But again, we talked about transitions to other materials. There's nothing that would prevent you from using a steel adjustable drop nipple and tying it directly into Cpvc at that point, if that's an option or a path you want to go down.
Great. There was one question about solvent cement, and that is, if it freezes, should you be using it? Like, is it still safe to use after it unfreezes?
I'd ditch it. That connection is such an important part of system performance. I wouldn't use the can. It may be perfectly fine, but I personally wouldn't take the risk. So I would ditch it.
Yeah, Lainey, I agree completely.
All right. I think we basically answered every questions. I mean, a lot of people ask sort of the same question, just in different wording, and so I believe that we addressed basically everything that was asked. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone, and if for some reason we didn't answer your questions, you can feel free to email us any additional questions you may have. But thank you very much to all of our panelists for joining, and thank you very much to everyone for attending and asking some great questions.